A reminder that this is a safe place. Feel free to talk with your mouth full because we're all pals here. So,
Awesome.
hello, my friends, and welcome back to Let's Get Cereal, the weekly show where I, your host, Alyssa Marino, eat cereal, talk about stuff, and sometimes talk to people. Now, I am simply delighted to be catching up today with pro wrestling personality, actor, writer, and overall tremendously fantastic human, Ty Matthews.
Hello there.
Thank you so much for being on this show today.
Of course, I'm honored to be here.
It is so nice to catch up with a friendly face like yours. So for today, of course, cereal is the name of the game. Can you share what cereal you'll be having today?
Yes, absolutely. I have got one of the Trolls World Tour tricks right now. I became a huge fan of that during the pandemic, during the early days when I was eating a lot of cereal, more so than usual. And so yeah, I was happy to grab a box of that. Typically, if the season was right, it would be one of the monster cereals, but you know.
Such is life. You know, we caught you on an off time, but we're starting the new year, starting it right. And
exactly.
I'm actually prepared with a very on-brand bowl for today.
Look at that.
For many of the things we'll be discussing. So, without further ado, my friend, Ty Matthews, let's get cereal.
Absolutely.
Cheers. Well, a reminder that this is a safe place. Feel free to talk with your mouth full because we're all pals here. So,
awesome.
Now, last time I saw you was at the inaugural event for Raise the Bar.
Yes.
Last year in October. So, how have you been? What have you been up to?
I've been really good, really good. I'm really over the last couple of years, I've been diving headfirst into acting. Last year was a lot of immersive productions. I'm a huge fan of immersive theater and interactive theater and like interactive horror. We've talked about this a little bit before. And last year was just really a really good year for immersive experiences. I started the year off doing an immersive virtual murder mystery kind of show called A Fate Worse Than Death, where the idea was it was a whole bunch of influencers that got roped into this like Zoom room by this psychopath that was forcing us to play games, or else he would out our like biggest secrets. And then the people that were watching the show and interacting with our actual Instagram pages, our characters' Instagram pages, could vote us off in real time and determine the course of the show. So I went right from that, into an immersive show called Elsewhere at the Mad Cat Motel that lasted for about 6 months in downtown LA. It was like this motel stuck in the 60s where portals to other dimensions had started opening up in different rooms.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I went from there to Delusion, which is like one of my all-time favorite like interactive horror pieces. And then I was Santa Claus for a while. So it was a very interesting year for sure.
Well, you really, you ran the gamut in 2021. So
right.
Yeah, from a twisted lab technician to a sinister social media influencer, a tortured spirit to jolly old Saint Nick. So you mentioned the term, and I'm wondering for our friends at home, how might you describe being an immersive actor?
Oh man, yeah. Being an immersive actor, it's really any scenario where everything is happening all around you. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot of improv that comes into play. And really, the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, having been a pro wrestler for so long, it's very similar skill sets. When you're on a show and you're a character, the second you come through the curtain, you're in character. And so having that familiarity with your character and knowing, okay, if someone says this to me, this is what I would say, this is how I would react, things like that. That really, really came in handy. And so yeah, it's touching on similar skill sets that I've explored, but also entirely new worlds.
So fascinating. And you spoke about delusion just now, and you shared a love letter to delusion and to immersive theater, saying that after seeing Mask of Mortality, you couldn't stop thinking about it. What was it about the immersive theater experience that you think made such an impact on you?
It was so when they did Mask of Mortality, which was back in 2013, it was really kind of the first immersive show that I had seen. Because up to that point, I had been obsessed with like haunted houses and haunted attractions and mazes, which is a form of immersive theater and immersive performance. But Delusion was the first time that I saw an entire play where like there were branching paths and you could get split up from your group and things like that. And so I think just the scope of the creativity behind it and the just how daunting it must be to have to sit down and think like, okay, they might do this, well then this has to happen, they might say this, then this has to happen. Like it was so huge and so daunting and so intense. Like it really felt like living in a horror movie. And so from then on, I became a huge Delusion fanboy. And so whenever they had a show, I was just like first in line to get tickets. And so even just to get a callback, let alone to land like one of the principal roles, was a pretty huge like Charlie Bucket moment for me.
Well, speaking of, Charlie Bucket and the idea of, childhood or younger dreams coming true, has the macabre been kind of an interest of yours from an early age? What was young Ty Matthews like?
So going back like super, super young, I was scared of everything. Like
Okay.
I remember, and we continuously to this day we give my mom grief for it, but like we would go to Disneyland every year, and one year I somehow caught a glimpse of the Yeti on the Matterhorn, and I was petrified. I was so terrified, and my mom, bless her heart, thought like, oh, once he sees that it's a ride, he'll be fine. I was not fine, and so for a very long time, I was scared of everything, absolutely everything. I didn't want to go on rides at theme parks. I didn't like. I remember sneaking downstairs when my babysitter was watching Child's Play 2, I think, and like having nightmares for days. But like there was this feeling, there was this reaction to the adrenaline that I don't think I realized at the time, but later on realized like, oh, I really enjoy that. And so I just kind of gradually like started moving closer or further and further out of my comfort zone, and eventually I discovered like, oh, I really like being scared. Like this is something that I'm super into. And so I became obsessed with roller coasters and with theme parks, and then later on with horror and horror culture and immersive horror and haunted houses, and it just kind of spiraled out of control from there.
Dang. And to go from being afraid of the Yeti to taking pride and joy in like living in a horror movie, that's a pretty impressive leap. So, and you hinted at it earlier, but years ago you were actually writing a lot about horror and haunts and immersive theater. So how do you feel like you really took the leap from reviewing, hosting, and doing interviews to them becoming part of these productions?
I think that was sort of the bridge between the two. I went from being a fan, just going to as many as I could. And I'm such a completionist that like during the Halloween season, I would sit down and I would have a list, and I would drive just hundreds and hundreds of miles from one to another just to knock out as many as I could in a night. And so then the next logical step was like, oh, like I can use that to be able to get into these for free. And so like I started I started becoming I minored in journalism anyway, and so it was really marrying a skill that I already had with this interest of mine. And so I started writing for different magazines and different publications about haunts. Really just as a tangent, like that kind of started because I was writing for my college newspaper back in 2008 at UC Riverside, and our Halloween issue was coming up, and we didn't really have a lot of content planned out. And I had just recently started going to like Knott's and Universal and things like that. but I started seeing all of these smaller ones, independent ones pop up, kind of the indies of the haunt community.
Great way of putting it.
Yeah, and so I told my editor, I was like, what if I just go to as many as I can possibly find and just write about all of them? And so that's kind of where it sort of started. And then fast forward to about I think 2018 or 2019 rather, there's a theater in North Hollywood called Zombie Joe's that Zombie Joe himself, and he is known as Zombie Joe. He insists on being known as Zombie Joe. He would always see me at these shows, and he would always say, you know, we got to get you in the cast. We got to get you in a show. And so finally 2019, I was like, all right, screw it. Let's see what this is like. And it just, once again, just something clicked where I was like, oh, this is something I've been into this whole time and I never knew. So yeah, Zombie Joe's is where it really kicked off. And then yeah, working at elsewhere at the Mad Cat Motel about a year ago, that's where it really, really triggered like, oh, this is something I really want to pursue like actively. And so yeah, it's been a blast.
Yes, and I know we've had this discussion in the past, and you know, we're very well versed in writing about it. But have there been any updates to your top ranking haunts?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I don't know if we've talked about this. Back in 2014, I did a tour where I went to 12 states in 2 weeks, just going to all of the top ranked haunts and haunted houses. That's when I went to like Terror Behind the Walls in Philly, at like Eastern State Penitentiary, things like that. And so I would say the top like 3 have stayed maybe roughly the same. If we're talking just haunts, at the top is probably Netherworld in Georgia. But you know, this was back in 2014 that I went, so it could be a different beast, it could be better, I think it's still there. But if we're talking about just immersive in general, nothing really spoke to me the way that Sleep No More did in New York City. That's another thing that really, really made me realize like, oh, this is something I'm really passionate about.
Heck yes, I want I want to be part of this. So now you touched on it briefly, but in the ever adapting landscape of, you know, the old pandemic versus the entertainment world, you were part of the Messy Theaters of Fate Worse Than Death, which is the online immersive thriller. So it's murder mystery plus the internet plus audience participation. Mm-hmm. How do you feel like that challenged you on different levels as an actor?
I mean, up to that point, I've always been terrified of improv. You know,
no.
When I started performing at the Pack Theater a few years ago, I gravitated much more towards sketch. I'm on a house sketch team now, and you know, having things pre-written has always felt like, okay, like that's like a safety net, like we know what's going to happen. Improv, I guess specifically improv comedy to me is so scary, just having to be forced to just like go with your instincts. And so A Fate Worse Than Death really, really challenged that in the biggest way possible. Mm-hmm. Our director was absolutely fantastic. Her name is Billy Hasselbrook, and she's just such a talented writer and director, and really like got us into this headset where I forget what it was. I want to say it was like a third scripted and 2/3 improvised. Like we would have these interactions with the other influencers that would kind of move the story forward, but then the mastermind, the villain of the show, would make us play these games against each other, and that was all entirely improvised. And so it really it was really getting thrown into the deep end in terms of really inhabiting a character and really truly living inside of a character. And I felt like I was cheating a little bit because my character was very, very similar to the character that I portray in the wrestling world. But it was, you know, it was still such a foreign scenario to me that like being able to do so many shows and do this, you know, multiple hour show so many times really, really honed our skills in terms of like, okay, just like thinking on your feet, you know, first thing, what does this character say? What does this character do? How does this character react to these other types of characters? Does he like this person? Does he hate this person? Things like that. And so it was such an incredible experience that I think really, really like changed me as an actor for the better.
That's incredible. And to have that much of an impact, just even going forward, it's stuff that you'll always carry with you into whatever you do next. So now you talked about your background as a journalist, and you've really reviewed everything from, you know, video games to feature films. So I'd say your pop culture influences and interests, they vary pretty nicely. Is there a certain show or movie that holds a special significance for you, or maybe something that you would consider like a comfort watch?
Oh man, I have a million different comfort watches. I'm trying to think. Multiplicity with Michael Keaton has always been like, my family growing up always has this like selection of movies that are like not super obscure, but like weren't like the top performers of that director or that actor. Okay. And so we would just watch them just over and over and over. And so it's movies like Multiplicity, Down Periscope with Kelsey Grammer.
Your dad calls him Chelsea Grammer?
Yes, right, exactly. I love my dad. And that's the thing is like, it's one of those things where these movies are fairly, like I said, like relatively obscure, but like they hold so much meaning to my family that it's so foreign to my dad that people would not have seen 1996's Down Periscope with Kelsey Grammer and Rob Schneider. So those are a couple of comfort watches. In terms of stuff that really resonated with me, you know, when I started doing the Ty Matthews character, I really looked more towards movies and TV than I did towards other, you know, wrestling characters. I mean, obviously there was a lot of influence from, you know, Percy Pringle and Paul Heyman and things like that. But more than anything, it was, for example, Tappy Tibbins from Requiem for a Dream, Christopher McDonald's character from the infomercials, or like Patrick Swayze's character from Donnie Darko. You know, these characters that are really, really preaching positivity hardcore, but are definitely hiding skeletons. And so those two movies were really influential on me creatively and in terms of my character.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for the motivational speaker that's, you know, not all there, not quite right, you know?
Right.
So, you know, from pandemic binge watches to online murder mysteries, the past 2 years have definitely been full of a fair bit of uncertainty. So how did you find yourself becoming a candle maker for Cantrip Candles?
That was very, very interesting. Yeah, I had taken an online improv class with a good friend of mine named Dash that I knew through the Pack Theater over the last couple of years. And it was just one of those things where at the end of the class, just offhandedly, I think in like a Discord server, he was just like, yeah, a friend of mine runs a candle company and they're looking to expand because Christoph, the owner of the company, had been making candles out of his apartment for the past like 5 or 6 years and had finally moved into a storefront in Hollywood and was looking to kind of expand the team because it was just him and like a handful of other people when it was in his apartment. And so I desperately needed work because obviously, you know, the world is ending. And but it was such a small team, and not only that, but it was such an interesting skill set and such an interesting job to have. And more than anything, like I feel like my motto in life, or my goal in life, is really just to like collect stories and collect experiences. Like that's kind of always what I've enjoyed doing, is like if there's something that I can do that nobody else in any given room can say that they've done, I want to do that thing. And yeah, I started working there last February, so it's coming up on a year. And yeah, I'm one of three people that regularly pour and make the candles. So yeah, if you've bought a cantrip candle over the last year, there's roughly a 1 in 3 chance that I made it by hand.
That's incredible. And also looking into cantrip candles, it's such a cool concept because it's the idea of it tying together with tabletop games.
Right.
So I just think it's such a fascinating product in itself. So it's cool to be a part of it. And now you add Chandler to your skill set and your resume.
Exactly. And it also touches on that idea of immersion. It's for when you're playing tabletop games or you're playing D&D, it really, it adds that extra sense to really immerse you in whatever world you're in. And so there's sense like bakeries and taverns and forests and like all sorts of stuff to go along with like your traditional D&D locales. And so yeah, it just it goes hand in hand with the theme of immersive experiences in my life and my career.
I love how that all works out, really. So,
right?
but speaking of experiences in your life and career, you really never know what the universe might have in store. And speaking of happenstance, we first crossed paths at Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, where you were actually my first ever interview that I conducted as a tryout to be a backstage correspondent for the show. So,
was I really?
Yes, you really were. I believe you were my audition. So I'm thinking this may or may not have been for the fact that you're always super supportive behind the scenes, but you are just so quick-witted. And that's why I find it so shocking that, you have a bit of a background in improv, but you said that it was kind of like a scary thing for you. Do you feel like over, the improv and pro wrestling do kind of go hand in hand in a way?
Absolutely, definitely. There's so much improv in pro wrestling. I've heard people describe it before as like improvised stage combat, which I think is fairly close. But there's so much thinking on your feet, and especially when I became a manager and started doing the Ty Matthews character, because before that, I mean, I've been wrestling since I was 13 years old, and so finally getting to cut promos regularly and like be on the mic regularly really honed that skill, because the thing that I tell people all the time coming up in wrestling is like promos are the one thing that you can practice no matter what, no matter where you are, you can always be thinking in promos. And that's what I would be doing. I would be driving out to Port Hueneme, hour and a half drive, just no radio, just cutting promos over and over and over repeatedly in the car. And so that helped a lot, like I said, in terms of that skill set of inhabiting your character and knowing on a dime exactly what they would say in any given situation. So yeah, there's a heavy amount of crossover between improv and wrestling that's benefited me greatly.
Yeah, both physical and, vocally, I'd say. So now over the years in pro wrestling, as you said, you've been a wrestler, you've been a manager, a commentator, and of course, first progenitor of hyperoptimism, as it says on your shirt. So hyperoptimism, for those that may not know, came complete with an onboarding pamphlet that would help to recruit new believers. So can you share how you developed, you touched on the characters that influenced the character, but how you developed the dogma of hyperoptimism?
Man, so like going back to the pre-hyperoptimism days, I was stuck in this sort of rut where I didn't know what I wanted to be or who I was as a character. When I started, for the first maybe 8 years of my career, I was Kid Carnage, and it was all very like I said, I was 13 when I started doing that, so it was all very teenage edgelord. But like from there, I was Jarek Matthews, and Jarek Matthews wasn't really like, I would incorporate the fact that I was like straight edge a little bit, but other than that, it wasn't really a fleshed out character. And it wasn't until, and I hope this isn't too long of a story, it wasn't until I designed my very first t-shirt And I had been going to a lot of hardcore shows and reviewing a lot of like hardcore shows and stuff like that. And what was very like trendy at the time was these really, really colorful, really cartoony shirts that didn't really have anything to do with anything. It would just be a random illustration and then like the name of the band. And so I wanted to do something kind of similar. And so I had a buddy of mine design a shirt where it was different characters from different Disneyland rides, all in a band performing. And so it was the Yeti from the Matterhorn on drums.
Of course.
Yep. It was one of the hitchhiking ghosts on vocals. And then it was one of the pirates on guitar from Pirates of the Caribbean. And on the back, it just said, "Today is the best day ever," just in big block letters, big exclamation point. And it wasn't really meant to be anything other than just like a bit, just like something silly that was like colorful and that people would want to like wear. But my good friend John Ian from Mach 1, you know, when he saw that, he knew how like smiley and how like happy I was in my day-to-day life. So he was just like, that's your gimmick now. You're just going to go out there and it's just all smiles all the time. And so from there, I kind of started honing like the face version of that character, high-fiving everyone and just like, today is the best day ever at all times. And then, you know, I took a break for a couple years from wrestling. And when I came back, this guy, Joe Franciosi, who has since passed, he was part of the creative team at Hollywood. And I think it was him and Stu Stone that asked me like, okay, what if we turned you heel? What would the best day ever look like if it was coming from a villain? And so that's when I started realizing like, okay, like maybe this is something that, you know, this is an influencer, this is a motivational speaker, this is someone who wants everyone to be happy all the time, no matter what. And he's willing to beat the hell out of someone in order to facilitate that. And so yeah, I was just like tossing around like words and stuff like that. I was like, because like relentless optimism was a phrase that I always really enjoyed and really kind of spoke to me. And so I was like, okay, optimism. And just one day it just clicked, like hyper optimism. And so I really wanted to, I think, touching on my interest in immersive theater and immersive experiences, I wanted to make it feel like it was bigger than wrestling. I wanted to make it feel like, okay, yes, you can watch this character on TV, but you can also read this pamphlet. You can also watch this video, this like sermon that I do and like things like that. And I just really wanted to expand it to the point that it was like almost like an ARG, you know, like there are these clues that I'm constantly dropping. And so, yeah, when I sat down to write like the pamphlet, it was really just like, how much bullshit can I spew about being happy? Because that's what this character would do. This is a character that just loves to hear himself talk. You know, he says 50 words when 5 would suffice, you know? And so that was really, I just sat down and it was just like a creative writing exercise. Like I would just sit down and go like, okay, here is my end goal. This is the point that I want to convey. And I would just let myself type, and just like my writing style is I try to do very minimal editing while I'm writing. I try to get it out as much as possible. And then once it's done, go back and go like, okay, I would change this. But yeah, it was just an exercise in bloviating, really.
Wow. So it tied together not only acting and wrestling and writing, but I mean, here's the serious question. If there was a hyper optimism candle, what would it smell like?
Oh man. That's very interesting. It would be sickeningly sweet. It would be like too, like a little bit too much, you know? There would be maybe hints of like cotton candy, stuff like that. I'm kind of thinking about like traveling carnivals from the 20s, from the Dust Bowl, and, like, like Carnival is one of my favorite shows, and so I've always associated like carnivals with like preachers on the radio and stuff like that. And so I think like I imagine if Ty Matthews is the modern equivalent of like a carnival barker or something like that, then it would have, you know, elements of like cotton candy, but also like kind of dust, like a little bit of like a dusty smell there, stuff like that. That's a very interesting question.
It's an interesting balance too, dust and cotton candy. Okay, I feel that. So as the, you know, first progenitor of hyperoptimism, it was all about, you know, keeping that positive mental attitude and of course being well. So in all honesty, you are one of the genuinely nicest people that I know, but you know, we know in the entertainment world, whether it be wrestling or writing or acting, it isn't always easy. So how do you take care of your mental health amidst, you know, grueling schedules and demanding work, you know, when it isn't the best day ever?
Sure. And that's something that I was like slacking on for a very, very long time. And honestly, I credit my girlfriend with really showing me the importance of self-care and of kind of, you know, these acts, things like that. Recently, I've been doing a lot of breath work, just sitting and just like trying to kind of shut everything out, because that's the thing with how busy I tend to stay, my mind is constantly firing on all cylinders. And so being able to sit down and just block everything out and just kind of, you know, just focus on my breathing helps a lot. Been taking a lot of walks. I tend to only like do things when I gamify them. And so I have this app called The Walk, where it's like, it integrates storytelling, once again, immersive storytelling with, you know, like your own like walking habits. So the idea is it's like a spy like action thriller where in order to unlock the next chapter, you have to walk X amount of like minutes like on the in-game like map basically. So you have to walk from here to here, and then when you walk there in real time and real distance, then it unlocks kind of the next chapter of the story. And so
that's so cool.
Yeah, and so I do stuff like that to like trick myself into doing stuff that's good for me.
Whatever works.
Exactly. But yeah, and so I've been doing that a lot, and yeah, just really just like trying to get as much fresh air as I can. You know, doing a lot of breath work. And then playing Fortnite with Johnny Yuma.
Cherry on top of, you know, protecting mental health. I love it.
That was one thing that we did not expect the pandemic to provide, is me and Johnny Yuma and Chris Terry becoming obsessed with Fortnite.
Again, we never know what the universe is going to throw our way.
Never know.
So recently you and I had talked about how you took the leap and really dove headfirst into creative pursuits and put serious focus on acting. What do you feel like guided that decision and gave you the confidence to bet on yourself?
A lot of it was performing in A Fate Worse Than Death. You know, that was really the first time that I had ever had a really prominent role in a production. And so having to kind of shoulder that, and you know, it was an ensemble cast. There was like 10 or 11 of us in the show, but like being able to really dive into these like monologues and things like that, and really shoulder a lot of the creative work, I think really gave me a lot of that confidence. And then also working at Elsewhere at the Madcap Motel, because when I started there, you know, there was the acting side, and then there was just the general maintenance side, and I was doing maintenance there at first. And it was one of my supervisors, one of my leads, that saw me kind of interacting in a character with guests, and she said like, yeah, you should audition for the acting side. And so that also, you know, being able to be a part of that, because we were doing that, you know, for most of the time 4 days a week for full 8-hour days. And so putting in a lot of hours and getting a lot of reps in, I think is also what really got me to that point where I'm like, yeah, I feel confident enough that I can keep trying. and then, like I said, it was really landing Delusion that, and like I said, not only getting a part in that show, but getting arguably one of the biggest parts in that show, made me kind of think like, oh, maybe there is something there, that I can kind of use and hone and keep pursuing.
Well, and honestly, congratulations to you for such incredible accomplishments and achievements over the past year.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But, it is still pretty early in this bright and shiny new year. So what kinds of goals and adventures are you manifesting for yourself in 2022?
This year, I really want to, I want to dive more into on-camera work, on-camera acting. I've done so much live theater and so much immersive theater, but I really want to, get a proper reel together, do more on-camera stuff. But also, there's also the sketch team that I'm on, Friendo. I want to do more sketch comedy. And I really want to get back to wrestling. It's been over 2 years now since I've had a match, and that is long enough for me. And so I really want to get back into it and return to Ty Matthews and see what he's been thinking this whole pandemic.
Well, color me curious too. So from on screen to in the ring, hoping for all of the best for you in the upcoming year. And honestly, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Where can our breakfast buddies find you to keep up to date on all your projects?
Yes, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, primarily at Ty Matthews PMA. Where else am I? You can find Friendo, my sketch team, at Friendo Sketch on Instagram and Twitter. Yeah, that's a lot of what I've got going on right now. I'm trying to think. Obviously, you can find Cantrip Candles at Cantrip Candles on Twitter and Instagram, all that stuff. But primarily Ty Matthews PMA. That's where you can find my updates.
My friend, it has been an absolute delight, as always. And I appreciate you taking the time to catch us up and share your story with us. So thank you so much.
Of course. I've been such a big fan of your work for so long. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you, my breakfast buddies at home. So until next time, my friends, continue to do your best to be your best. And we will see you later.